Welcome, everybody, to our Friday webinar series. The Global Institute of Coaching today is presenting Compassionate Leadership and Coaching. Thank you so much for joining us. We have really had a rhythm going with these webinars, and I'm super excited to be able to have the conversation with you all in terms of thinking more deeply about how we coach and the ways we coach. So I'm going to start us off by reminding everybody about what's our why. Why are we even having these seminars and webinars? And because we want to have a coaching conversation with you through chat and with our leaders that we have today together. And so it's important that we think about how we might sharpen the saw, then thinking about where we can go with that. So where can we go with thinking about compassion and leading and coaching? Also, I'm hoping you're going to take away one new thing today. I'm hoping that that is going to be something that you're going to carry with you after today, and that you take away a couple tools and resources for growth. So I want you to think about also the housekeeping. So use the Q&A to post questions. Just a gentle reminder, everybody can see your questions. The questions will be answered both at the end of the call, and we have some inserted into the program. So we'll be asking you to put some of your ideas in chat. And if your question isn't answered, we will post it at the Global IOC LinkedIn page and also at globalioc.com. And if we know who you are, and we pretty much do, we have those emails, we can reach out to you personally. And make sure you follow us on LinkedIn, because we've got a lot of great things coming up with our global community at Global IOC. So I want to introduce our two speakers for today. We have Kimberly Kleinman Lee and Marilyn Thea. And these two women are just amazing. They've been in the advanced program. They did the assessment only track, but their content, their information, and their background and their experience in leadership coaching, executive coaching, leadership development is fabulous. So I'm hoping that you have the same experience that I've been having with them as we start the program today. So Kimberly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Peggy. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. And I'm sure at this point in what has been happening in the world, you have been receiving information from a number of different sources. And the purpose of today's session is to really synthesize a lot of that information and turn it into what we really need right now, which is a bit more compassion in the world, specifically in the world of work, as it relates to how we interact as humans. So just as a bit of a recap, let's talk about how we got here. Just in the last 90 days, there have been some really amazing stats coming out. A third of Americans are showing signs of anxiety, depression, or both. 1 in 5 Americans have filed for unemployment, and a lot of the data here is US based, and we'll talk about why that is in a second. If you think about even the concept of now the social movement that has been reignited here, there are still so many inequities that are going on that are leading people to protest in new, different, and voluminous ways than ever before. Other stats that I've heard are alcohol sales are up 55% just in the last 3 months. So the amount and change that we're seeing in the world from every aspect of our life has just become incredible. So when you look at the next slide, we started with one crisis, if you will, in the world, and that was a health crisis. And Peggy, if you could just advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we started with the health crisis. That sparked an economic crisis. That revealed a leadership crisis on all sorts of levels: government, community, corporations, etc. And then finally, that reignited a social movement, one that's been going on for decades, but has a degree of momentum and visibility that perhaps we've never seen the likes of before. And we're all really hoping will finally lead to some significant structural changes. those crises together have become quite daunting for folks on a number of different levels, not only how they run their business, how they operate in the world, but also how they create a sense of self and identify not only what they're strong at, but how they can help others through this as well. The impact that's having is really far-reaching. So as Peggy turns to the next slide, you'll see that just about every type of institution has changed forever. So if we look at everything from communication and how we communicate and the demand for more transparency and accuracy, the way in which we educate our young folks, the way in which governments are interacting with their constituents, law enforcement being called into question in a number of different ways. Marilyn and I both live in southeastern Wisconsin, and they just announced yesterday that the Milwaukee public school system is cutting all ties with the Milwaukee Police Department, and which is an astronomical change for the urban city of Milwaukee. News and reporting, I'm sure you all have heard how that is being represented around the world. Transportation, corporations, sports and entertainment, every aspect of our lives have changed, again, causing us to think about this in new and different ways. So as we move to the next slide, everyone has probably heard of the term VUCA. It's a military term born out of World War II, where the military was trying to explain in a very simple way the types of context that their servicemen and women were facing. And they called it VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, to really define a certain situation. And then, of course, they'd have strategies and approaches that would help them combat those situations. And although we've used this term in the corporate world for quite a while, I think that was light duty compared to what we're seeing now and how VUCA is showing up in the world today. So all of that context really causes us to look at a number of things. On the next slide, you're going to see, bottom line is human systems have been tested. Every type of system, how we educate, how we lead, how we vote, how we shop, every type of human system has been tested. And then secondly, and maybe even more importantly for we coaches, those in positions of power, of leadership, are being watched, assessed, and judged more than any other time in their careers. And with criteria that perhaps is rather new, and we're seeing really big shifts, even from a political perspective, in those that thought they were dedicated to a certain party, a certain leader, a certain leadership style, are now starting to question things based on the way crises are being handled. So all of that together is really making this concept of compassion a critical ingredient for all leaders. So at this point, Peggy's going to pose a question for the group, and we'll talk a bit more about that.
Thanks, Kimberly. That was really a great introduction. And while the group noodles on this question, how would you describe your coachee's mindset based on current world events? Marilyn, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing with the groups you're working with and how their mindsets are shifting during this time.
Yeah, Peggy, thank you, and hello to everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you today. So, you know, what I am seeing is, first, what I was seeing 2 months ago, a little different than than maybe a month ago, and even more different than today. People thought their world was turned into turmoil 2 or maybe it's 3 months ago now, and that was with the health crisis. Then when they realized what the financial impact was going to be, and that's going to be a long-term impact, even more sort of turmoil and what should we be doing. And then now with the social justice situation, honestly, I am seeing some leaders just literally putting their hands up. They don't know what to do anymore, and they are really feeling what Kimberly said of they are being watched. Every email they send out, every statement they make, especially people making statements to the media, even on small regional levels, they are trying to figure out, how do I keep driving accountability and get the results we need in this business, and yet how can I be compassionate and understanding to those that are impacted?
So how are they handling this, Marilyn? I mean, I know that for many people, the feelings of being judged are just, they can demoralizing is the word I'm thinking of. So how are your leaders taking this?
So I will tell you, I'm seeing two different reactions. One reaction is, I don't know what to do, and some retreating and some not making the decisions they need to be making. And on the opposite side, and I think especially, and we'll probably talk about this more as we get into compassion, there is this fear, if I show compassion, I'm going to be looked at as being soft. And so they're not showing up. They're also stressed, and we all know how we get when we get stressed. We don't show up as the best leader we can. And so I'm seeing that either withdrawal or some not showing up the best they can.
Wow. So before I go back to Kimberly and ask her to answer that same question, how are you on the call? How are you finding your clients right now? What's shifting for them? How are they handling this aspect of feeling judged or being being held to a different standard or shifting standard? So please put your information in the chat. And Kimberly, share with us what you're experiencing with your leaders.
Very similar to Marilyn, I think what we're seeing now is that the need for courage is showing up with a very different definition of courage. So where courage before was taking the big swing, taking a business risk, maybe making a critical decision, et cetera, is now really shifting to having courage with the humans that you interact with every day. So folks are needing to depend on relationships that perhaps they hadn't spent time cultivating. I see that at the senior level specifically, where they've been so busy, stressed, and tired with just general work that they haven't necessarily invested in the relationships that were critical to helping them get work done, and no time in their history have they needed partnerships like they are needing today. And then secondly, I think it's to Marilyn's point, it's folks are at a loss. What can I say? What should I say? How should I say it? Will I be judged if I make a mistake? Where's the threshold of no return in terms of if I say something that's inappropriate, how will it impact me? You're seeing many folks in the popular press right now losing employment, losing customers, losing clients, losing credibility in their brand because of what they've said, shared, posted, or how they've acted. So the pendulum has definitely swung. We want it to stay extreme for a while for hopefully broad sweeping systemic change, but to the degree where we can actually equip folks to make those choices in healthy, productive ways. And that's where we as coaches, I think, are just so critical at this time of crisis.
Wow, there is a lot going on. And we have two responses in the chat, and one says that I see leaders trying to be all to all and burning themselves out as they try to do that. And then a secondary comment is survival and making things work in a different way on all levels. So what do you think about those two comments?
And Kimberly, I'm going to jump in here. On the leaders trying to be all to all and burning themselves out. And we actually have a slide later on. I'm going to talk at the very end about this. And we're going to be talking about compassion and compassionate leadership. First and foremost, the leaders today have to be compassionate to themselves. They have to show some self-compassion. This is the parents, put your oxygen mask on first on the airplane before you can help others. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. As coaches, we have to help our people see they need to be focused on the most critical things, not on everything. They can't be all to all, or they're not going to be anything to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to try something a little bit new here. And Diana has raised her hand, so I'm going to allow her to talk. So Diana, if I can't get, the only way I can allow her to talk is to get her microphone off. So if you're raising your hand, you're going to have to put your question in chat, because the system has your microphone off and I'm not able to allow it. You know, I've asked to unmute, but I'm not allowed, I can't do it. So sorry about that. Please put your questions in chat. Let's go forward. So I think Marilyn is going to guide us in the next conversation.
Yep. So I think the important thing is, before we spend the rest of our time talking about compassion, we really have to get an understanding of what is compassion. And Peggy, if you can go to the next slide. So, you know, and there may be a bit, maybe a build was in this. I don't see the whole slide showing up. Maybe just try it. Yeah. Okay. So when we look at the definition of compassion being the intent to contribute to the happiness and well-being of others, if some of you are coaching leaders like I'm coaching, they would look at this and go, oh, way too much woo. My job is to make money for this corporation. My job is not to make everybody happy and be concerned about everyone's well-being. So I definitely have a couple of coachees who go down that path. But I think, as we read, so Simon Sinek, his latest book, The Infinite Game, as you read through that, we have to look at, are we in for the short-term wins or are we in for that long-term gain? And being a compassionate leader, investing in your people, acting with, you know, on what you're seeing with your people, is about leading for the greater good. And I'm going to share in a minute some statistics around compassionate leadership. But the words compassion and empathy go together a lot. Empathy is the ability to feel what someone else is feeling. And then compassion is to recognize that and do what you can to alleviate that, to make the person not only feel whole, but in the business world, they will be more productive if you are able to do that. Mark Goulstein wrote the book, Just Listen. If you have not read that, I would suggest, first of all, not only every leader needs to read it, but every coach needs to read it as well. And the one sentence that I took out of this probably 300-page book that I use over and over is, because everybody says, oh, listening is important. People want to be listened to. And it's like, yes, and people want to feel felt. So people want to feel felt, and compassion is what helps you show that you are doing that. So why is this important in a business context? And Peggy, if you want to go to the next slide. So this is some research done by the Potential Project. The Potential Project, and this was published in Harvard Business Review. It's a global leadership and organizational development company and a research firm. And they've defined, I'm not going to go through, you can see a little bit of what they're saying, but lower employee turnover, higher collaboration, and when your employees are more trusting, and we'll talk a little bit about Lencioni's work on trust in a little bit, when they're more trusting and connected to each other, they are going to perform better for the company. So there is research that shows that building compassion into a culture and being a compassionate leader is absolutely critical for the success of a company. And their research actually blew me away, to be honest with you. 91% of leaders that they surveyed indicated compassion is very important for their leadership. That number doesn't surprise me. I don't know that they will all walk the talk, but that number doesn't surprise me. But this is the shocker to me, that 80% said they'd like to enhance their compassion, but they do not know how. And if that does not scream, I need a coach, I'm not sure what does. So, you know, really a great time for us as coaches to be helping the leaders to walk, you know, to really walk the talk. So, Peggy, if you want to go to the next slide. The other thing we need to think about, and this is actually a quote from Cy Wakeman. Cy Wakeman is another one of my favorites, but and she bases this on neuroscience. When we are judging someone else, we cannot be helping. And what I have seen with some of my executive leaders is, first of all, the magnifying glass is on everyone. And so Kimberly alluded to how, leaders are being judged and assessed right now. Actually, everyone is being judged and assessed. That the magnifying glass is on, and those strong performers have really risen to the top. And those who maybe were struggling prior to the pandemic are struggling even more now. And it's easy for the leaders to come in and try to judge those people. But in neuroscience, we learn our brain cannot literally be judging someone and figuring out how can I best help that person all at the same time. And so, you need to think about, as you're listening to those that you are coaching talk, what judgments are they making that are actually preventing them from being able to help their employees, bring their employees to a place where they can perform better. And, this also screams out, I'd be remiss, especially with Peggy leading this, to not bring up, PEA and NEA. And we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the research around that as well. But this is also, the positive emotional attractors are what are going to motivate people to change and move forward. So next slide, Peggy. So I think we have had some phenomenal examples throughout the pandemic of not only seeing compassion in action, but now seeing that compassion in leaders has actually had a positive impact. So I'm talking right now very specifically about the pandemic and the COVID situation. And this was obviously a global situation. We saw leaders of basically every country handle this in their own way. But we saw, several women really rise to the top in how they handled the pandemic from early on. And now what we're seeing is the results are very good in those countries. And, I want to be careful about, this is just about women, but women, and we look at differences, research shows known differences between men and women and their typical strengths and typical areas they aren't as strong. And women always have been very high in empathy and compassion. And as a matter of fact, sometimes, and I would say, I hope it's not today, but a couple decades ago, that very fact is what sometimes worked against getting women in leadership roles. And we're going to talk later more about that whole, if I have empathy and compassion, am I being soft? And so there's some articles and resources here you can look at, but we all just witnessed that having empathy and being compassionate actually got better results. So all again proving out in the research. Peggy, go ahead. So Peggy, you want to pose a question here?
Yeah, so we want to hear from you. So please use the chat to talk to us about what your clients are feeling about compassion and how they integrate compassion into their leadership and what their experience has been. And while we wait to hear from you, so please give us your information and your ideas. I'm going to ask Kimberly to talk a little bit about, can you describe the most compassionate leader you have coached? And what were a couple of the behaviors of that coach, or that leader rather?
So I just finished a couple months ago a series of sessions with a leader from a Fortune 50 company. He was brand new to his role, moving from the head of a function to the head of a business at this company. And his the amount of things he needed to overcome were tremendous, mostly technical skills, the ability to, again, switch from a functional lead. He happened to be a chief legal officer at this company, moving into, again, the COO of a business. So he had quite a bit to overcome in his own right. And then, of course, the crisis hit shortly after, the pandemic first, and then everything else that followed. And what I loved about it is, depending on your philosophies about leadership, in this case, a leader is a leader is a leader. The way he led his legal counsel, is the strength that he brought to this business role. And he just shined. He listened, he questioned way more than he talked and gave advice. He instantly went to holding sensing sessions with his folks. And in essence, what he did and what we're trying to represent in our presentation today is he tied the data to the compassions of empathy and compassion. So he looked at, okay, if it's true that 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people have now filed for unemployment, that means just about everyone on my team has someone in their immediate circle who is unemployed. I need to recognize that and give them the support and flexibility they need. So he instantly put in a 4-day work week. Do what you need to do to keep the wheels on your own personal bus. We will be okay. He also looked at the, again, the new the social crisis that has gained quite a bit of momentum, of course, as of late, and instantly went to how do I not only model it, but teach folks how to go out and educate themselves and ask questions and make it okay to say things that might not be PC in the hopes that we can all learn. So again, he just put himself out there, but it had very little to do with his technical capabilities and much more to do with how he had grown as a leader and transferring those skills.
So how would you say he's viewed by his peers? I can imagine by his directs, people love him, but what is the view from the peer group?
Yeah, such a great point. Beloved by his directs, and his peer group is new. It's a new group to him because of his need to switch roles, so to speak. So what's interesting is, and we're going to talk about Lencioni's work in a little bit, it goes to that concept of Lencioni's primary team. So when you are in really any business situation, your primary team, most folks will think it's you and your direct reports. But in Lencioni's words, it's one of my favorite things from the 5 Dysfunctions book, your primary team is actually you and your peer group, who all have very different responsibilities on that core team. Your job is as a peer group to set the vision, the standard, and the pace for the company. And then you turn around and you interpret that vision, standard, and pace to your direct reports so they can go about getting the work of the business done. And if that peer group is not strong and those relationships are not tied, there will be a lot of assumptions made about what you're bringing to the table. And that's where he's really trying to catch up and work faster to show the same degree of leadership to his peers as he is to his direct reports.
That's great. What a great comment. So we have a comment from the group. Female clients are very aware of the importance of empathy and compassion from my experience as a coach the past few months specifically. And then in addition to that, conversations with team members have changed to demonstrate empathy and compassion. It's not task focused only, but balanced with a strong people focus. Marilyn, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just, I have to say, I am seeing that as well. Even the leaders that are very task-oriented leaders, they are at least starting their meetings with, how is everyone doing? How are you doing? And so, I mean, Kimberly had a great example of a multifaceted approach that her leader was taking, which is awesome. But if we can even, I mean, baby steps with some people, if we can even just get, someone to, before they start in on the work to do and what we have to do with the, let's do a check-in, let's see how everyone's doing. Can everybody say one word that would describe how they're feeling today? Little things like that. So no, I think that comment from Zelda is great. We also,
oh, go ahead, Marilyn. No, go ahead. Finish your thought, please.
No, because I was going to go to one of the questions in the Q&A. So Kimberly, please.
I was just going to do the very same thing. It was a great question from Jack that talked about outsourcing compassion. And if we call it that, right, that alone will probably give my answer to Jack's great question, because I'm sure You know, it always makes me cringe when leaders outsource performance review content to the HR person to have them write their performance reviews for their people on their behalf. And this is in that same vein. You just can't outsource compassion. And if you are coaching an HR person or working in HR and you're being asked to that, this is a great lesson in love that you need to offer your leaders, that their employees want to hear from them, they want to feel from them, they want to be understood that they are valued, that they are cared about. And it's great if it comes from the HR person. Quite frankly, it just needs to come from everybody. But the leader is in place to be all about the people, to get work done through the people. And right now, compassion has to be the big wrapper. And if they aren't doing that, this is a great coachable moment from HR to the leader.
Awesome. Marilyn, did you see the chat?
Yeah, yes. And I just want to thank Jack for his question, because I am going to use that. I'm probably going to use it in an hour on my next coaching call. I never had thought of the concept of when they're trying to get HR to do it, it's outsourcing it to, you know, to HR and other functions. So I don't love the concept, so let me tell you that, much to what Kimberly said, but I really do appreciate that thought, because it is like outsourcing it if you're just going to tell the HR, you know, lead to handle it. So I do see another question in the chat about times of crises expose the quality and character of leadership. Does the panel think our global leadership is measuring up? If not, why? And I want to be careful about turning this into anything political, because I absolutely don't want to do that. But I think, first of all, absolutely, when I said the microscope is on and the judgment and assessing of people, we are seeing the quality and characteristic of leadership globally. And I think that's, you know, kind of was the point from my previous slide of, we are seeing really good examples. And I think we're seeing not so good examples. And we're seeing some countries that have led and had people be as calm as people can be in a pandemic, respond, got people on the same page, and now we're seeing their numbers going down, that meaning their COVID numbers going down. And I think we saw other leaders globally that maybe created a little more chaos and divisiveness in their countries, and you know, it leads to more VUCA, if you ask me, more chaos and more VUCA. So I think it's hard to say global leadership is across the board. We can't measure it as one across the board, because I think we see so much variance.
So I'm going to move on to keep us going. And Marilyn, I think you're up. Or no, it's Kimberly. Kimberly, you're up.
Sure. Thanks, Peggy. So as we think about the first two parts that we covered, the data and what's making up our reality these days, and then this case for compassion and introducing another capability competency to a tool set that some leaders might be missing, we wanted to introduce you to three specific works that we thought really resonated with us. There are so many that we could have pulled in, but these three seem to be quite salient for today. One is on scaling leadership. I'll introduce that book and that work to you in just a bit. 5 Dysfunctions of Team, we've mentioned already. That's Lencioni's work. And then Resonant Leadership by Boyatzis and Friends is another really great one, accompanied by an article that Marilyn's going to introduce you to. So as we move to the next slide, let's just talk about that. The whole concept here is, even though we might have thought we were in VUCA before, from a work perspective, this is VUCA on steroids, VUCA gone wild, if you will, and it's really redefining. We thought the threshold was high before. It's now redefining where that bar has been set, and we will forever be comparing things to. Do you remember those 3 months where we really did a nosedive? I was on a call the other day that had the chairman of the Federal Reserve of Atlanta, and he said in 3 months, we fell from a GDP perspective to what took a year and a half during the Great Depression. So if you imagine that economic impact, in 3 months, we accomplished from an economic downfall perspective what it took a year and a half during the Great Depression. It's extraordinary times. And again, we will forever be comparing that. So to be able to sort of thrive, if you will, in this new reality, there are some things that I think we can do. And I just love the work that I was recently introduced to by Peggy of Bob Anderson and Bill Adams around scaling leadership. And really fantastic work. I strongly recommend the book. The synopsis is great, but the book really does lay out the data quite well. I'm going to give you just a taste of it. So again, strongly recommend you download their stuff. As you look at the concept here, the bottom line is leaders develop other leaders. And the reason you need that is because there's just a whole nother set of responsibilities that's been born of this crisis. So let's talk about the 6 conditions for scaling. They insist that in order to develop other leaders in a way that is productive and helpful and so forth, you need to have these 6 components, and I'll let you read those specifically. The one we're going to be focused on is this concept of being radically human, which really speaks volumes about the nature and role of compassion in today's leadership world. The quote I want you to walk away with here is: the best leaders are in relationship at every level of scale, up, down, and sideways, external, internal, and it starts with themselves. So if you think about what they consider to be scale, it's, are you self-aware? Do you understand your strengths and your non-strengths? Do you engage in feedback both ways in private, one-on-one with team members and peers? Are you maximizing your interactions? When you are meeting in a group setting, are you just informing one-way communication, or are you really getting down to the very difficult work, decision-making, conflict, healthy version, making sure all the best ideas are on the table? And then lastly, as a business leader, are you navigating complexity? One of the things I make sure the leaders that I work with think through is, I may be working with an HR executive, a finance executive, a legal executive. My first words to them are, you are a business leader who happens to work in HR. You're a business leader who happens to work in legal. You're a business leader who happens to work in supply chain and so forth. You need to have that big hat on and then be able to interpret it to your function. So that's what I love about their version of complexity. As you move into the next slide, I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I just want to give you a taste of the breadth of this particular study that they did. You guys might know Anderson and Adams' work on the leadership circle. That's their assessment instrument. They took the data that they acquired from all of that great work and then really studied it in a new and different way to create this, incredible work. So really vast in terms of who they assessed, how they looked at it. They did slice it by gender. And the reason that that's pretty critical is because they do have a section in their book called Surprises, and the things that they were really surprised at, which these days, there's so many leadership books out there, it's hard to be surprised at anything. But they did have some really great reinforcements that I think are worth talking about. So as you look at their work, you're going to hear 2 phrases. One is reactive and one is creative. And it's really 2 different sets of competencies that make up what they consider to be great leadership. However, one has a tendency for stickiness. One is considered more effective, more productive, especially for the long haul. And to Marilyn's earlier point, that's really what we need to be focused on now. So as Peggy turns to the next slide set, here are 4 bits of data that I thought would be really relevant for today. And let me explain kind of how to take all of this in, and then I leave that to you as homework to dig in deeper. So when you think about the concept of high reactive versus high creative, let me just define that for you first, and then we'll dive into what the data is showing. High reactive is really outside in. It's where the leader takes their cues from others in terms of whether or not they're doing a great job. So it's their metrics, it's their feedback, it's the reaction of the team, it's wrapping themselves in the culture and context. Is it safe to take a risk? How will I be viewed? Will this help me with my promotion, et cetera, et cetera? All of those things, of course, logically, we do need to have an eye on, but it shouldn't be the only basis by which we go about our work. So it's really more fear-based than strengths-based. So that's where high creative comes in. High creative, based on strengths, is really working from the inside out. These are the folks who really want to create and participate in an amazing work experience. They want to create and define the kind of culture and company that they can be proud of, that they see themselves in, and that they want to include other individuals into that particular work affect. So when you think about this one, again, it's you will get judged, if you will, from the outside, but you in your heart have to know that what you're doing is the right thing. What Anderson and Adams have said is both are critical, both are table stakes, they're both needed to be successful. And let's just turn to the data now at this point. If we start in the upper left corner, these are the concepts that are table stakes, really. So both types of leaders will come with passion and drive, will be visionary in their own right, will be strong networkers, will have technical knowledge. We know that most folks who are promoted based on their technical knowledge and capabilities, but then expected to have these leadership capabilities that are extraordinary, and that's sometimes where folks fall short. And you can read the rest of them going down that list in the lower left, in the upper left chart. Again, these are the table stakes, what's critical. Then as you look over to the far right square, you'll see that for creative leaders, what sets them apart from the reactive leaders are really people skills, bottom line. And this is where the stickiness comes in, their ability to be effective and affective in their own right. They have strong people skills, visionary, they know how to build and work through teams, they're approachable, they're allowed to learn under those leaders, they're stretched and molded in ways that, again, are productive for the long haul. And again, you can read the rest of the list. For those leaders who were defined more as having reactive skill sets, you'll see that their numbers are quite a bit lower, statistically significant in their own right. That then brings you to the lower left corner of this chart, where the creatives have very few liabilities, meaning that the reactive skills that they portray are not canceled out, so to speak, because they have such great, solid, creative type capabilities and concepts. So the term creative and reactive might throw you a bit. Define it as they have in this study. So in essence, you need both, but if you don't have sufficient people skills, it's going to cancel out all the great productive work that you're doing. And that's what's said in the lower right corner here, where reactive is great at, again, getting the work done. It's not enough to sustain high effective performance to the tune of 6.5 times more effective. So it's a lot of content. I'm going to move you to the next slide just to summarize one particular part of that data set, and then we'll certainly have a chance for questions either along the way here or after. What they drill down into, and this is specific to the people skills component, is this concept of being radically human, radical humanness. And they have some really great comments in that chapter of the book. So the summary here is the vulnerability to learn out loud and deep relationships with those around you, with displaying an unusual degree of humanity, self-awareness, courage, and integrity is really what's going to define the future leader. There are some leaders that are already being defined as that, of course. In their book, they reference that about 28% of the leaders out there have this, this creative leadership, if you will, which leaves a lot of great work for we coaches to continue on the battle, so to speak. But when you think about this concept of being authentic, comfortable in your own skin, being able to position yourselves as the one to be disruptive, as opposed to everybody else needs to change. Shift from knowing to learning, shift from controlling to empowering, all things that we've heard about before, but this wrapper of radical humanness, I think, really brings it home. It requires a degree of maturity. So this is where your EQ stuff comes in. And then fierce humility and vulnerability, asking more questions and telling. It's the great example of the legal counsel that I mentioned who went into another role. He isn't being successful right now because of his technical capabilities. He's being successful because he's being radically human. And that's what this particular study just highlighted so well. So I'm going to pause there. If there are any questions, feel free to bring that up. Otherwise, I'll transition it to Marilyn to introduce you to the second work we wanted to highlight.
Okay, so first, are there any questions on what Kimberly just went through? Because it was absolutely rich with a lot of great ideas. Okay, and if not, Peggy, if you want to just advance the slide, there's a build on this. Keep going. Yeah, okay. So let's talk a little bit. And the reason that we are talking about a lot of this work that is proving the importance of compassion in leadership is that if, I don't know, if you are like me, I have some people that I am coaching that I'm actually having to convince them of the importance of this. And so we're going to talk a little bit later about how you make someone self-aware and how we can help them see the importance of this. And clearly, when we're able to reference some of this work, it is coming from people much smarter than I am as their coach, and you know, has research behind it. So Patrick Lencioni, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I would hope that most people on this webinar are fairly familiar with his work. And if not, I would suggest that you take a look at it. And I want you to think of this again. He does a lot on teams. And you know, back on the slide, what I think Kimberly's first one on scaling leadership, that being in relationship at all areas and thinking about the teams, your primary team, right, which is your team of peers, so to speak, your team that reports to you, the team even going upward. The 5 dysfunctions work at every level. And basically Lencioni's work has shown at the foundation of a high-performing team, there must be trust. And the way that you get trust as a leader is by being vulnerable. I mean, all of this fits right into what Kimberly was just talking about with the radical humanists. There absolutely must be trust in the leader. The leader must trust the team must trust each other. They must all be willing to be vulnerable with one another. And then, as you can see, once you have trust, you have to be able to have good, healthy conflict, make sure everyone is on the same page with goals and commitments, accountability, and so forth. I do a lot of work with teams, and I have to say, I cannot think of a team that I have done work with that when we did the assessment, showed there was an issue with trust and we had to start there. So almost every time, trust is what is broken within a working environment. So we're going to talk about tips and tools later on. We don't have this slide in that section, but Lencioni has a great team assessment that you can do. So you can go online, look up his work. I always recommend for any leader that I am working with that we do that team assessment. And most of the time the leader will say, oh yeah, the trust is there, the trust is there. And then we do the assessment and find out, no, the trust isn't there. And that's a great springboard then for the conversations about compassion and the culture they're setting up. So we can go to the next slide, Peggy. And I want to make sure we have time for the tools. So I'm going to just kind of breeze through this. And I think Kimberly talked about this a little bit earlier as well. Resonant leadership with Richard Boyatis and Annie McKee. Positive employee performance correlating to leading with compassion and empathy. That pretty much summarizes it. Again, there is work out there. It shows that those positive interactions, you know, really are what going to help people change. And then, you know, the 3 components of compassion that they talk about: empathy, again, for others, caring for others, which really are critical. And then the last one is what I think today we're seeing are people stepping up, a willingness to act on those feelings. So we have leaders, I don't want to say giving lip service, but coming right out. They're so empathetic, they're so caring. And now what people are forcing them in this sort of social justice crisis that we're in right now is, what are you going to do about it? And so I think that's, again, in the leaders we're going to be working with, to be able to help them formulate what they're going to do. They can't just feel it. So Peggy, if you want to go to the next slide.
So do you want to skip through this question section and get to make sure you get your last section in?
Yeah, maybe we can do that, and then hopefully there'll be some time at the end for questions.
Awesome.
So
I think this comes to you now.
yeah, it is me. So you can go, we're going to talk about 4 things. And so if you want to go to the next slide. So first of all, published in May of 2018, HBR and Harvard Business Review, there's an article called Assessment, Are You a Compassionate Leader? This again, this is a great tool, and the link to the assessment is right in the article. And first of all, let me just a small technical tip. It does not work with Safari. And I've seen other comments on the HBR article about the browser. I did get it to work in Mozilla, Firefox. You might have to play around with it a little bit. So, you know, that's a little disclaimer in case anybody goes on. This is a great tool for us to be able to help our leaders look at, are they compassionate? It is an online, you take it and then you can see they'll get a report that I've taken a couple screenshots of mine that will first of all show your score compared to the HBR average. I gotta say, I'll admit, I just whipped through the assessment, giving the answers I knew they wanted to see because I knew I was gonna be showing a screenshot. I don't want you to think I'm actually all that high up in that quadrant, but they'll see where they compare to the average, and then they will get an individualized report depending on what quadrant they fit in, as to the very specific things they may be needing to do to grow the compassion. So again, what we're trying to help you right now with coaches is, if we have someone who we think maybe struggles in this area, for me, the first thing is we have to make them aware. And so this will be a great awareness tool. Peggy, if you wanna go to the next slide then. Now I'm gonna turn it over to Kimberly, who's gonna talk about a technique a coach of hers used with her. So again, trying to give you guys tools that you can be using with your coachees.
Thank you, Marilyn. So this one comes courtesy of Greg Thompson, who is former CEO and president of Blue Point Coaching, and they have a curriculum and of course a cadre of coaches, and I leveraged them quite a bit when I led leadership at General Electric and formed up a friendship with him. And about 15 years ago, I was getting ready to go into a coaching session with a senior leader who was just known as being a tough cookie, quite frankly, really difficult, really strong, a bit abrasive. And I had myself worked up into a tizzy. I was, newer at the coaching thing. It wasn't my full-time job. I was being pulled in to build a relationship with him based on some work that I had already done in a class. And I posed my challenge to Greg as an aside off of a different conversation we were having. And he said, well, I have a bit of advice if you'd be up for it. And I said, sure. And he said, here's how I handle that. Whenever I'm going into a situation where I know I'm about to face a difficult client, conversation, personality, I think of them not as I am currently facing them, meaning this person is going to be difficult and so forth. I think of them as their wife thought of them on their wedding day, as their mom thought of them at birth, as their best friend thinks of them as they're sharing a beer, et cetera, et cetera. It's a totally different way to change your mindset about the situation you're going in. At the end of the day, of course, when it comes to this compassion stuff, I wasn't having any compassion toward the person across from me, knowing that in this case, it was a he. He had been going through some pretty significant transitions of his own, and that is what I was experiencing. I made it all about me and not enough about him as I prepared. So now, as I know that I'm going into a difficult situation, I spend 10 to 15 minutes before that conversation doing nothing more than, as Greg will say, falling in love with that person. You have to use the extreme language to just wrap yourself around the technique. So that 10 to 15 minutes of falling in love with the person you're about to have a conversation with makes all the difference. And that was the lesson I received as a coach needing some compassion. Marilyn, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, that is a great story. And really just want to end here with some of the work of Byron Katie, and it really, I think, correlates well with what Kimberly is saying. Getting your coachees to be thinking differently. So in Kimberly's case, Greg helped her see that she needed to fall in love with the person. I'm picturing some of my executives and when I'm posing that to them, but it will get the point across. But as I'm hearing, and I think I mentioned this early on, I'm hearing my leaders being negative on some of their people and negative on their inability to react fast enough in different crises and to be agile enough to pivot when they need to, and negative. And so I'm really using Byron Katie's The Work, the 4 questions. You know, is that true? What else can be true about that person? So maybe they're not pivoting quite as quickly. Do you think there could be something else going on? You know, are they, you know, really a bad person, a bad employee, or what else? And really helping them see this just continual chain of negative reaction around how they lead someone based on their belief, and getting them to turn that around. If you didn't think that about the person, and in some ways, Kimberly, that's what Greg helped you do. If you didn't think about the executive you were going to pitch to as this, you know, surly person who's going to maybe shut down everything, then, you know, then what possibilities would there be? And absolutely did the turnaround. So I don't want to spend, I know we're getting short on time, but use these questions, coaches, as you're working with your leaders to get them to be more compassionate. If you want to go to the next slide, Peggy. And this relates back to the question that was asked early on about, or not question, but the comment of your leaders are feeling overwhelmed. They're stressed, they're overwhelmed. I have used this slide, I cannot tell you the number of times in the last 2 months. I have it on my desktop because I'm emailing it to everybody I'm coaching virtually, and I've just started doing face-to-face coaching again, and I've printed like 5 of them off of my printer, so I have it ready to go. But they have to, self-compassion has to come first, and really helping them look at, do I have to be all things to all people? Or can I choose actions based on my values, the values of the company, and only focus on what matters most? And, you know, I'm not going to walk through all of these, obviously, but on the gets, takes on too much versus carefully chooses what to take on, and feeling in control. People don't like that internal buka feeling when they're not in control. So I think stopping before we start talking to leaders and coaching them on their need to be compassionate to others and to their team and to their employees, are they being compassionate enough to themselves that they have the energy and the reserves to then turn around and be compassionate to others? So Peggy, why don't we go on, and I know we went through that a little bit quickly, but I want to open it up here at the end if there's any questions, comments overall.
If you have any comments, please put them in the chat. I know we're getting to the top of the hour, but I cannot tell you, this was an amazing presentation. Kimberly, Marilyn, thank you so much for your participation and sharing your great ideas and sharing your experience, because this is bringing scholarship and practice together. That is the point of the webinars, is to make sure that we have that integration. So we do have one question before we go. Well, more thank you. And I can't thank you enough either. So let's go into just a quick wrap up for all of you. And that is that on July 10th, we're going to continue. We've got these set up now till the end of August. So we've got reflective practice and coaching coming up on July 10th. We have a session on gratitude on July 24th. We have a session on emotional literacy on August 7th, and a session on habit development and performance on August 21st. So please continue to join us. We really appreciate your participation today. And again, Go out to Global IOC for more information on the blog, communities of practice and thought leadership, and follow us on LinkedIn because we have announcements coming out there fairly regularly. And again, and again, and again, thank you, thank you, thank you, Kimberly and Marilyn. Awesome job. And please have an awesome weekend and a great rest of your day. Talk to you. Thank you all for your participation today.